Where is she?" David's voice didn't merely echo. It fractured the heavy silence of the war room. He hurled a crystal decanter against the stone wall, the shattering glass violently punctuating his demand. His elite guard stood frozen, none daring to meet the Alpha King's furious, bloodshot gaze. "I gave a direct order to lock down the city. How does a woman just vanish, sire?" His lead tracker, Marcus, murmured, dark blood trickling from a fresh cut above his eye. "She didn't just vanish, she erased herself. Every camera feed, every financial ledger, every border checkpoint, gone." David grabbed Marcus by the tactical collar, lifting the larger man off his feet. He had chosen the crown, chosen a political bride just hours ago, arrogantly believing Lisa would stay waiting in the shadows. He was dead wrong. Tear the kingdom apart. Find her. Now, the crystal chandeliers of the grand ballroom cast a fractured, suffocating light over the celebration. 1,000 flutes of vintage champagne clinked in unison, a chorus of high society approval that grated against David's heightened senses. He stood at the apex of the sweeping marble staircase, the undisputed ruler of the territory, his broad shoulders encased in a custom midnight blue suit that felt more like a straitjacket. Beside him stood Victoria, the daughter of the Northern Syndicate, her arm laced tightly through his. She was a strategic alliance, a necessity, a shield against the encroaching border wars. She was not Lisa. David's jaw clenched as he scanned the sea of faces below. He smiled, a practiced, hollow expression that didn't reach his eyes. His gaze swept past the dignitaries, the council members, the sycophants, searching for that familiar, quiet presence. Lisa always stood by the western pillar during these events. She preferred the shadows, her sharp eyes cataloging threats, while her mere proximity kept David's volatile temper anchored. But the space by the pillar was empty. At first, he told himself she was simply doing her job, running security from the perimeter, avoiding the spectacle of his political betrothal. He had expected her to be hurt. He had braced himself for her silent stoicism, for the cold shoulders she would undoubtedly give him behind closed doors. He had even prepared his speech, the desperate rationale he would pour out to her. "It's just a title, Lisa. It changes nothing between us. I still need you." But as the minutes bled into an hour, a cold, sharp dread began to uncoil in his gut. The faint, underlying scent of vanilla and ozone, her signature, was completely absent from the cavernous room. "You're tense," Victoria murmured, her lips brushing his shoulder in a display of faux intimacy for the cameras. "Smile, David. You just secured the largest alliance this kingdom has seen in a century." "Excuse me," David muttered, untangling his arm from hers with a sharp, dismissive movement that made several nobles blink in surprise. He didn't wait for her response. He descended the stairs with predatory strides, the crowd parting before him like water. He bypassed his security detail, ignoring Marcus's questioning look, and pushed through the heavy oak doors leading to the estate's administrative wing. The music from the ballroom became a muffled, distant pulse. Lisa's office was at the end of the corridor. The door was locked. David didn't bother with a key. He planted his boot against the wood near the handle, shattering the locking mechanism with a single, brutal kick. The door slammed open, rebounding off the wall. The room was pitch black. He hit the light switch. Silence rushed in to fill the space. The office was immaculate. Too immaculate. The dual monitors on her mahogany desk were powered down. The corkboard, usually covered in tactical maps and intelligence reports, was stripped bare. He crossed the room in 3 strides, ripping open the desk drawers. Empty. Not a single pen. Not a single encrypted drive. Not even the small, dried lavender sprig she kept tucked in the corner. Panic, raw and unfamiliar, clawed at his throat. He pulled his encrypted phone from his pocket and hit her speed dial. "The number you have reached is no longer in service." "No," David breathed, the sound harsh in the empty room. He hit the intercom button on her desk, directly linking to the perimeter guard station. "Gate 4, report." Static hissed for a second before a voice crackled through. "Gate 4, holding steady, sire." "Did Lisa pass through your checkpoint tonight?" "No, sire. We haven't seen her since the morning briefing." David's chest tightened. He turned around, his eyes desperately scanning the room for a note, a clue, anything. That was when he saw it. On the pristine surface of her desk, sitting perfectly centered, was a single object. It was a heavy, silver king chess piece. David reached out, his hand trembling slightly as his fingers brushed the cool metal. 5 years ago, when they had first taken this territory together, she had handed him this exact piece. "You play the board, David," she had told him, her eyes fierce and loyal. "I'll protect the king." She had left it behind. She was no longer protecting the king. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs. He had thought he was making a sacrifice for the kingdom by choosing Victoria. He hadn't realized that the cost of the crown was the only woman who made the kingdom worth ruling. She hadn't thrown a fit. She hadn't screamed or demanded he change his mind. She had simply walked away. The rain began to fall shortly after midnight, a torrential downpour that turned the city streets into slick, black rivers. David drove his reinforced SUV himself, the engine roaring with a ferocity that matched the storm inside his chest. He had abandoned his own engagement gala, leaving a bewildered Victoria and a scandalized council in his wake. He didn't care. The political fallout was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, the only thing that mattered was the gaping void Lisa had left behind. He pulled up to the curb outside a nondescript brick apartment complex on the edge of the financial district. This was her private sanctuary, a place completely off the official grid, known only to him and a select few. 2 black tactical vehicles were already idling in the alleyway. As David stepped out into the freezing rain, Marcus jogged over, holding an umbrella that David immediately shoved aside. "Give me the report," David demanded, his voice slicing through the sound of the rain. Marcus looked pale under the orange glow of the streetlights. "Sire, it's a ghost town. My men breached 10 minutes ago when she didn't answer." David pushed past him, taking the stairs 2 at a time. The door to apartment 4B hung open, its frame splintered from the breach. He stepped over the threshold, water dripping from his tailored suit onto the hardwood floor. He expected chaos. He expected the signs of a struggle, or at least the messy aftermath of a frantic, tearful packing session. He found neither. The apartment smelled like industrial bleach and ozone. It was a sterile, chemical scent that completely masked the comforting aroma of vanilla that he so deeply associated with her. The living room was perfectly arranged. The bookshelves were empty. The kitchen counters were wiped spotless. David walked slowly into the bedroom, his heavy boots echoing off the bare walls. The bed was made with military precision. He walked to the closet and slid the doors open. Empty hangers chimed together in a mocking, hollow sound. "She didn't pack," David whispered, tracing a hand along the bare wooden shelf. "She didn't just throw things in a bag. This takes time." Marcus, who had quietly followed him into the apartment, nodded grimly. "Forensics team sweep confirms it. There are no fingerprints. None. She wiped everything. Even the drain traps in the sink and shower have been chemically flushed to destroy DNA. David turned slowly, staring at his second-in-command. You're telling me that while I was negotiating treaties and planning a wedding, she was methodically erasing her entire existence right under my nose? It appears so, sire. Furthermore, Marcus hesitated, swallowing hard. Her bank accounts, the offshore ones, the dummy corporations she managed for the crown, they're still full. She didn't touch a single dime of our money. She only took what was strictly hers before the takeover. That detail twisted the knife deeper. If she had stolen millions, it would have been a betrayal he could understand. It would have been vengeance. But this? Leaving the money meant she didn't want him to have any excuse to hunt her. It was a clean break. Total severance. David sank onto the edge of the perfectly made bed. Dropping his head into his hands, his mind raced back to the past few weeks. The late-night arguments about the Northern Alliance. The way she had quietly stepped back, her eyes growing distant as he rationalized the engagement to Victoria. He had been so blind, so intoxicated by his own ambition, that he mistook her silence for acceptance. "Find her," David said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous gravel. "Sire." Marcus started gently. "She designed our tracking algorithms. She built the evasion protocols we use to hide from the Federals. If anyone knows how to disappear from us, it's her. It's like trying to find a shadow in the dark." David stood up abruptly, the sorrow in his eyes hardening into a terrifying, obsessive resolve. "I don't care if she vanished into thin air. I don't care if she's on the other side of the planet. Ground the private jets. Freeze all commercial flights out of the territory. I want checkpoints on every highway, every dirt road, every port." "The Council will object," Marcus warned. "Putting the kingdom on lockdown hours after a peace treaty. I am the king," David roared, the sheer volume rattling the window panes. "The Council breathes because I allow it. Victoria holds my arm because I permit it. But Lisa is mine. Execute the order, Marcus, now." As Marcus scrambled from the room to relay the commands, David stood alone in the sterile bedroom. He noticed a slight unevenness in the floorboard near the radiator. He knelt, prying it up with his fingers. It was a hidden compartment they had built years ago. Inside lay a simple, battered silver lighter. He had given it to her on the night they survived their first assassination attempt. He gripped the lighter so tightly the metal bit into his palm. She hadn't just run away. She had surgically extracted herself from his soul, leaving only cold metal behind. And he would tear the world apart to put her back. 3 days. 72 agonizing hours of absolute silence. The kingdom was beginning to fracture under the weight of David's obsession. Trade shipments were stalled at the borders due to the suffocating checkpoints. The council was whispering of treason and instability. Victoria had retreated to her family's wing of the estate, her humiliation morphing into a cold, dangerous fury. David ignored all of it. He had moved his command center into the lower levels of the estate, surrounded by glowing monitors, half-empty whiskey glasses, and terrified analysts. "Talk to me," David growled, leaning over a digital map of the continent. His eyes were bruised with exhaustion, his jaw covered in 3 days of dark stubble. A young technician, her hands shaking, pointed to a blinking red dot near the coastal port of Blackwater, a gritty, lawless town 300 miles south. "Sire, we got a ping. A burner phone was briefly activated 10 minutes ago. It used an encrypted frequency that matches the backdoor codes Lisa wrote for our beta units." David's head snapped up. "Blackwater? The shipping yards?" "Yes, sire. Sector 4. A motel called the Anchor." Prep the strike team, David ordered, already reaching for his tactical holster. Sire, wait, Marcus cautioned, stepping in front of him. It could be a trap. Let me send a vanguard unit first. If she sees a vanguard, she'll run. I go. Now. The flight took 40 minutes via the Royal helicopter, battling through heavy crosswinds and a relentless coastal storm. When they touched down on the damp tarmac of Blackwater, the smell of salt and rotting fish filled the air. David led the 6-man tactical team himself, moving through the shadows of the rusted shipping containers toward the flickering neon sign of the Anchor Motel. Room 114. David stood by the door, rain slicking his hair to his forehead. He gave the hand signal. Marcus kicked the door, the cheap lock giving way instantly. They flooded the room, weapons raised, sweeping the corners. Clear. Clear. David lowered his weapon, his chest heaving. The room was empty. It smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap bleach. But underneath it, so faint he thought he might be hallucinating, was a trace of vanilla. On the peeling veneer of the nightstand sat a single, cheap burner phone, plugged into the wall. Next to it was a small digital audio recorder. David walked over to it, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He ordered his men out of the room with a sharp jerk of his head. Once the door clicked shut, leaving him alone in the dim, dingy space, he pressed play on the recorder. Static hissed, and then her voice filled the room. Calm, measured, utterly detached. If you're listening to this, David, it means you brought the strike team yourself. You always were predictable when you were angry. Hearing her voice felt like taking a bullet to the chest. He squeezed his eyes shut, leaning heavily against the wall. By the time you trace this ping, the cargo ship carrying the receiver module for this phone will be in international waters heading toward South America. The ping was bounced. I'm not in Blackwater, David. I was never in Blackwater. He opened his eyes, staring fiercely at the plastic device as if he could manifest her from it. She was playing him. She was using his own vast resources, his own aggressive tactics, to send him chasing ghosts. Stop looking for me. The recording continued, the tone softening just a fraction, revealing a razor-thin edge of sorrow. You made your choice on that balcony when you put her ring on. You chose the throne. You chose safety. You don't get to keep me as a secret in the dark anymore. I won't be your collateral damage. I didn't want her, David whispered to the empty room, his voice cracking. I only wanted you. Take care of the territory, David. And don't bother tracking the serial number on this recorder. I bought it with cash 3 months ago. 3 months. The recorder clicked off. The silence that followed was deafening. David stared at the wall, the revelation tearing through his mind. 3 months ago. That was before the council had even formally proposed the alliance with Victoria. Lisa had seen the writing on the wall. She had watched his ambition grow, watched him entertain the political maneuvering, and she had begun planning her exit. She hadn't run in a moment of heartbreak. She had orchestrated a masterclass in disappearance while lying beside him every night. He crushed the burner phone in his hand, the plastic snapping under his grip. She was brilliant. She was lethal, and she was entirely out of his reach. But as he walked out of the motel room into the pouring rain, the despair in his chest alchemized into a dark, terrifying fire. If she had been planning this for 3 months, she had left a trail. It just wasn't a trail meant to be seen by a king. It was a trail meant to be hidden from a predator, and David was done acting like a king. He was going to become the monster she always kept, on a leash. 2 weeks bled into 3. The territory, once a beacon of ruthless efficiency under David's reign, was now choking on his obsession. The war room had become his tomb. Maps of the continent papered the walls, crisscrossed with red yarn and dead-end coordinates. Empty coffee cups and half-drained tumblers of amber liquor littered the tactical tables. The air was thick with the ozone hum of overworked servers and the sour tang of David's own exhaustion. He hadn't slept more than 2 consecutive hours in 21 days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the empty space by the western pillar. He smelled the phantom scent of vanilla. The heavy steel doors of the command center hissed open, breaking the suffocating silence. David didn't look up from the satellite feeds, his bloodshot eyes tracking a cargo vessel off the eastern seaboard. "Get out, Marcus. I told you I don't want the casualty reports from the border until morning." David rasped, his voice rough like crushed gravel. "It's not Marcus." The voice was pure ice. David finally looked up, his jaw ticking. Victoria stood in the doorway, framed by 2 of her own Northern Syndicate guards. She wore a pristine, ivory-sheathed dress, her blonde hair pulled into a severe, flawless chignon. She looked exactly like what she was, a queen in waiting, bred for power, untouched by the dirt of actual warfare. Her blue eyes swept over the squalor of the war room with thinly veiled disgust before settling on David. "Leave us," Victoria ordered her guards, without breaking eye contact with David. The heavy doors slid shut, sealing them in. "You're trespassing in a restricted sector," David said quietly, pushing away from the hollow table. He was a predator forced into a cage of his own making, his posture lethal despite his fatigue. "I am your fiancé," Victoria countered, her voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper. "Though no one in the kingdom would know it. You abandoned our engagement gala. You haven't attended a single council meeting. My father's supply lines are freezing at your borders because of your paranoid checkpoints. You are humiliating me, David." "Your humiliation is not my concern." Victoria stepped closer, the sharp click of her heels echoing off the stone floor. "It should be. My father offered you this alliance to stabilize your borders. We brought you an army, financial backing, and legitimacy. And you are throwing it all away to chase a ghost. A security contractor who couldn't handle her demotion. In a blur of motion, David crossed the room. He didn't touch her. He didn't need to. He simply invaded her space, towering over her, the sheer, terrifying gravity of the Alpha King radiating off him in suffocating waves. Victoria flinched, a microscopic step backward that betrayed her sudden, visceral fear. "Never speak of her again," David commanded, the softness of his tone making the threat infinitely worse. "You are a signature on a piece of paper, Victoria. A political transaction. You wear the ring. But do not mistake yourself for someone who holds any power in this room. If your father wants to withdraw his troops, tell him to try. I will crush the Northern Syndicate before breakfast." Victoria swallowed hard, her pristine facade cracking. She saw the absolute madness swirling in his dark eyes. "You're insane. She broke you." "She didn't break me," David whispered, stepping back, the fire in his eyes turning cold and calculated. "She woke me up." As Victoria turned and fled the room, her composure entirely shattered, David stared at the blank screens. Victoria was right about one thing. He was chasing a ghost, using the very machinery the ghost had built. Lisa had designed the surveillance network. She knew every blind spot, every algorithm, every federal backdoor. Trying to find her with technology was like trying to drown a fish. If he was going to find her, he had to stop acting like a king with an army. He had to go back to being the street fighter who had bled in the gutters. He had to go off the grid. He needed dirt, blood, and memory. and he knew exactly who traded in all three. The Narrows was a district that the Crown pretended didn't exist. It was a subterranean labyrinth of old subway tunnels, illegal fighting rings, and black market bazaars. The air down here tasted of copper, sulfur, and cheap tobacco. It was the only place in the city where David's cameras didn't penetrate. David walked alone. He wore a worn leather jacket over a dark Henley, the collar turned up against the damp chill. No guards. No earpiece. Just a combat knife strapped to his thigh and a suppressed pistol at the small of his back. He pushed through the rusted iron doors of the Boiler, a subterranean speakeasy that doubled as an information broker's haven. The heavy, thumping bass of underground techno rattled his teeth. The crowd, a violent mix of mercenaries, smugglers, and thieves, parted instinctively. They didn't recognize the king in his tailored suits, but they recognized the aura of a man who could kill everyone in the room without breaking a sweat. David bypassed the bar and headed straight for the VIP booth, shrouded in cigar smoke. 4 massive enforcers stepped into his path, their hands resting on their holstered weapons. "I'm here to see Silas," David said flatly. "Silas doesn't see strays." The largest enforcer sneered. David didn't blink. He grabbed the enforcer's wrist, twisting it inward with a sickening pop, while simultaneously driving a knee into the man's sternum. The giant collapsed, gasping for air. Before the other 3 could draw their weapons, David had his pistol out, the suppressor pressed directly against the forehead of the second guard. "Tell Silas the stray bites. Let him in." The voice drifted from the shadows of the booth, smooth and amused. David holstered his weapon and stepped into the dim light. Silas sat sprawled on a leather sofa, a glass of dark rum in his hand. He was a slender man with a face full of intricate tattoos and eyes that held the terrifying calm of a snake. He and David despised each other. Years ago, before David took the throne, they had nearly killed each other over territory. It was Lisa who had brokered the truce. She had dragged a bleeding David out of an alley, patched his stab wounds, and forced him to the negotiating table. Well, the Alpha King descends into the muck, Silas drawled, taking a sip of his rum. "You look terrible, David. Heavy lies the crown and all that." "I'm not here for poetry, Silas. I need to know where she is." Silas chuckled, a dry, scraping sound. "The whole city knows you lost your leash holder. It's bad for business. Your checkpoints are costing me millions." David pulled a heavy leather pouch from his jacket and tossed it onto the table. It landed with a dense, metallic thud. Uncut diamonds. "There's your compensation. Now talk." Silas didn't even look at the stones. He leaned forward, his amusement fading into a sharp, judgmental glare. "You think you can buy her back? You really are blind, aren't you?" David's hands balled into fists. "Tell me what you know." "I know that 3 weeks ago she came to me," Silas said, his voice dropping. "She cashed in the favor I've owed her since the truce. She needed a shadow identity. Not the digital kind you play with, a paper identity. Forged dental records, retrofitted birth certificates, analog trails. Things your algorithms can't sweep." David's heart hammered against his ribs. "Where did she go?" "She didn't tell me," Silas lied smoothly. But then he sighed, pulling a small, folded piece of parchment from his breast pocket. "But she did leave this. Said to give it to you if you ever figured out that the throne was a cage." David snatched the paper. "She didn't leave because her heart was broken, David," Silas said quietly as David unfolded the note. "She left because you brought a viper into your bed. Victoria's father isn't an ally. He's been buying up our mercenaries for months. The Northern Syndicate is planning a purge, and you were too busy looking at the crown to see the knife at your throat. Lisa saw it. David froze, staring at Silas. "I'll protect the king," she had said. "She couldn't fight Victoria's family from inside your house." Silas concluded softly. So she stepped outside. David looked down at the parchment. It contained a single string of latitude and longitude coordinates, an analog map reference. He didn't say another word. He turned and walked out of the club, the crushing weight of his own arrogance threatening to bury him alive. The coordinates led him 300 miles north, deep into the jagged, unforgiving peaks of the Black Ridge Mountains. It was territory technically bordering the Northern Syndicate's land, a brutal, frozen wasteland that most considered uninhabitable. David had driven a customized off-road rover as far up the mountain as the terrain allowed, hiking the last 3 miles on foot through knee-deep snow. The biting wind whipped at his face, freezing the moisture on his eyelashes. But the physical pain was a welcome distraction from the agonizing realization of what Lisa had sacrificed for him. She had let him believe she walked away out of jealousy. She had absorbed the heartbreak, the isolation, and the danger, all to give herself the tactical freedom to dismantle his enemies from the shadows. Through the howling whiteout of the blizzard, a shape materialized against the gray rock face. An old, decommissioned Cold War listening post. Half buried in the snow, it looked dead. But as David approached the heavy steel blast door, he noticed the snow around the hinges had been melted away recently. He didn't bother trying to pick the reinforced lock. He placed a small shaped charge of C4 against the mechanism, stepped back behind a rock outcropping, and blew the door. The muted thump sent a minor tremor through the ground. David drew his pistol and slipped inside the gaping, smoky hole. The interior was pitch black, freezing, and silent. He clicked on the tactical light mounted to his weapon, sweeping the narrow concrete corridor. The air was stale, but beneath the dust, there it was, the faint, undeniable scent of vanilla. He moved with predatory silence, checking every corner, every abandoned room. Finally, he reached the central operations hub. He pushed open the heavy double doors and froze. The room was not abandoned. A massive bank of modern servers hummed quietly in the corner, powered by an off-grid generator. The walls were entirely covered in physical intel, blueprints of the Northern Syndicate's estates, shipping manifests detailing illegal weapon transfers to Victoria's father, photographs of council members taking bribes. It was a sprawling, meticulous web of treason, all meticulously documented. Lisa had been busy. She hadn't just been hiding. She had been preparing for war. David walked slowly toward the center of the room, his eyes scanning the evidence of her brilliance. On the main desk sat a steaming mug of tea. She was here. Recently. A sudden, sharp click echoed from the catwalk above him. David froze. He didn't raise his weapon. He knew the sound of a high-caliber sniper rifle chambering around better than he knew his own heartbeat. Slowly, he looked down at his chest. A tiny, brilliant red laser dot rested directly over his heart. "Drop the weapon, sire." The voice came from the shadows of the catwalk, slightly distorted by the echoing concrete. But it was undeniably hers. Cool, professional, laced with a familiar, dangerous edge. David's breath caught in his throat. He didn't drop the gun. Instead, he slowly, deliberately set it on the desk beside the steaming tea. He raised his hands, turning his gaze up toward the darkness. He couldn't see her, but he could feel her. The phantom ache in his chest instantly vanished, replaced by an overwhelming, volatile surge of emotion. "You're a hard woman to track, Lisa," he said, his voice remarkably steady despite the tremor in his hands. "You shouldn't be here, David," she replied from the dark. You're compromising the operation. What operation? Sacrificing yourself to save a king who didn't have the sense to see he was being played? David took a step forward, the red dot tracking perfectly with his movement, remaining dead center on his chest. I spoke to Silas. A beat of silence. Silas has a big mouth. Come down here, David demanded, the Alpha King bleeding back into his tone, desperate and commanding. Look me in the eye. If I come down there, I won't be able to shoot you, she said, though the steel in her voice wavered ever so slightly. And right now, shooting you is the only way to keep you from ruining months of work. Go back to your castle. Go back to your Ice Queen. I have a war to finish. David shook his head, taking another slow step toward the catwalk stairs, ignoring the lethal red dot. There is no castle without you. There is no crown, David said, his voice dropping to a rough, vulnerable whisper that echoed through the bunker. I tore the kingdom apart looking for you. I'm not leaving without you. So, you're either going to have to pull that trigger, Lisa, or you're going to have to come down here and let me help you burn the North to the ground. The red dot held steady on his heart for 5 agonizing seconds. Then, the laser clicked off. The metal stairs of the catwalk groaned under her boots. David didn't move, his eyes locked on the shadows, until she finally emerged into the harsh, flickering fluorescent light of the operations hub. Lisa looked different. The polished, invisible security director in perfectly tailored dark suits was gone. She wore black tactical fatigues, a plate carrier over her chest, and a drop-leg holster. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe braid, and there were deep, bruised shadows under her eyes, mirroring his own exhaustion. But it was her expression that struck him the hardest. It wasn't sad. It was terrifyingly indifferent. You're a fool, David, she said, her voice devoid of the warmth he had spent 3 weeks craving. She walked past him, entirely ignoring his outstretched hand, and picked up her mug of tea. Your rover outside is basically a beacon. If you found me, the Syndicate's hounds aren't far behind. I covered my tracks, David countered, his voice thick with a mix of awe and lingering adrenaline. He turned to face her, taking in the sheer volume of intelligence papering the bunker walls. You did all this? While you were playing house with the daughter of a warlord who wants your head on a spike? Lisa took a sip of her tea, her dark eyes flashing over the rim. Yes. Someone had to do the actual work of keeping this kingdom intact. Why didn't you tell me? The question ripped from his chest, raw and desperate. He closed the distance between them, stopping just inches from her. He could finally smell the vanilla again, cutting through the damp concrete and gun oil. Why didn't you bring this to me? We could have handled it together. Lisa set the mug down with a sharp clack. Tell you? When? Between your clandestine meetings with Victoria's father? Or during the fittings for your tailored wedding suit? You were intoxicated, David. You wanted the easy alliance. You looked at the Northern Syndicate and saw a shortcut to absolute power. If I had warned you, you would have demanded proof I didn't have yet. Or worse, you would have confronted them and triggered the war before we were ready. So you just abandoned me? I didn't abandon you, Lisa snapped, her composure finally cracking. She shoved a hard finger against his chest. I saved you. I excised myself from your life so Victoria would think she won. I gave them the false sense of security they needed to get sloppy. And it worked. She turned away, marching toward the main server console. She hit a few keys, bringing up a live satellite feed. General Vance, Victoria's father, isn't waiting for the wedding. His troops have been moving under the guise of border security. They are positioned to strike the capital tonight. They are going to slaughter your loyalists, assassinate you in your sleep, and crown Victoria the sole sovereign." The peace treaty was a Trojan horse. David stared at the screen, the tactical reality washing over him, instantly sobering his heartache. He had been so blind. "The checkpoints I set up looking for you." Inadvertently slowed his supply lines. Lisa finished, a grim smirk touching her lips. "Your paranoid obsession to find me actually bought us 3 weeks. But the window is closed. They move at midnight." David reached into his pocket and pulled out the battered silver lighter. He placed it gently on the console beside her hand. Lisa stared at it, a flicker of genuine pain crossing her features. "I found it under the floorboards," David said softly. "You left it." "I had to leave everything," she whispered, her voice dropping to a fragile pitch. "If I kept a single piece of you, I wouldn't have had the strength to walk out that door. You don't have to be strong alone anymore." David reached out, his large, calloused fingers wrapping gently around hers. This time, she didn't pull away. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through him, grounding the chaotic storm that had raged in his mind for 21 days. "I don't want the North. I don't want the shortcut. I just want my partner back. Tell me how we kill this threat." Lisa looked down at their joined hands, taking a deep, shuddering breath. When she looked back up, the vulnerability was gone, replaced by the lethal tactician he loved. "We don't kill it," Lisa said, her eyes turning flinty. "We broadcast it. I have the wire transfers, the hit lists, everything. If we upload this to the Central Council servers, Vance loses all legitimacy. His own generals will turn on him." "Then do it. Upload it. I need 10 minutes to bypass the Council's firewalls," Lisa said, turning back to the keyboard. Suddenly, a harsh, blaring alarm severed the quiet of the bunker. Red strobe lights began pulsing from the ceiling. Lisa's hands flew over the keys, bringing up the perimeter cameras. The screen showed the snowy ridge outside the bunker. 3 heavily armored transport vehicles were cresting the hill. A dozen men in white winter camouflage poured out, assault rifles raised. "Well," Lisa said, drawing her sidearm with a smooth, practiced motion. "It looks like General Vance didn't wait for midnight. They tracked your rover." David drew his own weapon, the Alpha King's deadly calm settling over him like a heavy mantle. "How long for the upload?" 7 minutes. "I'll buy you 8, David promised, stepping toward the heavy steel doors. The first explosion shook dust from the bunker's ceiling. They were using breaching charges on the secondary blast doors. David took his position behind a reinforced concrete pillar near the entrance, checking his magazine. He had 15 rounds in his primary weapon and the combat knife at his thigh. Against a dozen heavily armed syndicate operatives, the math was brutal. But David had spent his entire life defying brutal math. "They're coming through the ventilation shafts, too," Lisa called out from the server hub, her fingers flying across her keyboard while her eyes darted to the camera feeds. 2 on the roof, prepping gas canisters. I'm overriding the HVAC systems now." "Keep the upload going," David shouted back. The heavy steel door at the end of the corridor blew inward with a deafening roar, a cloud of snow and smoke billowing into the subterranean hallway. Tactical flashlights cut through the dust. David didn't wait for them to acquire targets. He leaned out from cover, firing 3 precise, controlled bursts. 2 of the white-clad soldiers dropped instantly, their armor failing against the armor-piercing rounds he favored. The remaining operatives returned fire, chewing up the concrete of David's pillar in a hail of deafening gunfire. "Suppressing fire!" one of the syndicate men barked. David ducked back, debris peppering his leather jacket. "Lisa, talk to me." "Upload at 40%, she yelled. "David, incoming. Flashbang." A metal cylinder bounced down the corridor, clattering to a halt near David's boots. He squeezed his eyes shut and clamped his hands over his ears, opening his mouth to equalize the pressure. The explosion was blinding, a concussive wave that rattled his teeth. Through the ringing in his ears, he felt, rather than saw, a soldier rush his position. David spun, dropping low, and drove his combat knife upward into the gap between the man's body armor and helmet. The soldier crumpled. David ripped the man's assault rifle from his dying grip and swung it around, unleashing a torrent of automatic fire down the hallway, forcing the advancing squad to dive for cover. 60%. Lisa updated, her voice tight. "They've breached the server room vents. I've got company." David's blood ran cold. He abandoned his cover, sprinting back down the corridor toward the main hub, firing blindly to keep the hallway clear. He burst through the double doors just in time to see a syndicate operative dropping from the ceiling grate, rifle raised toward Lisa's back. Before David could aim, Lisa spun in her chair. She didn't flinch. She fired twice with her sidearm, hitting the operative dead center in his visor. He fell to the floor with a heavy thud. She turned back to the screen without missing a beat. 80%. I need 2 more minutes, David. Hold the door." David took cover behind a row of metal filing cabinets near the entrance of the hub. The remaining syndicate soldiers were advancing cautiously down the corridor, realizing they were up against a meat grinder. "Vance wants him alive if possible. The girl is expendable," a voice echoed from the hall. David caught Lisa's eye across the room. A grim, shared understanding passed between them. They were back in the Narrows, back in the gutters, fighting back to back against the world. David stepped out from cover, tossing his empty assault rifle aside and drawing his pistol. He moved with a terrifying, liquid grace, closing the distance to the doorway. He caught the first soldier coming through the frame, disarming him with a brutal strike to the throat, then using the man's body as a meat shield as the others opened fire. He dropped the shield, fired his last 3 pistol rounds into the chest of the squad leader, and threw himself back behind the metal cabinets just as a fresh wave of bullets tore through the room. He was out of ammo. He drew his combat knife, his breathing heavy, preparing for the final, desperate hand-to-hand rush. "Upload complete," Lisa shouted. Her hand slapped a heavy red button on the console. Instantly, a high-pitched whine filled the bunker, followed by a localized electromagnetic pulse from the decommissioned Cold War tech she had rigged. The lights blew out. The syndicate soldiers' night vision goggles shorted in a shower of sparks, blinding them in the absolute subterranean darkness. "Now," Lisa whispered into the dark. David moved perfectly in the pitch black, relying on memory and instinct. He heard the panicked shouts of the blinded soldiers. It was a slaughter. He moved from shadow to shadow, his knife doing silent, lethal work. Within 90 seconds, the corridor was completely quiet, save for the dripping of melting snow and the harsh rasp of David's breathing. The emergency backup lights flickered on, casting a dim, red glow over the carnage. David stood amidst the fallen squad, wiping his blade on his pant leg. He looked back into the server room. Lisa was standing by the console, her weapon lowered, staring at the screen. "It's done," she said softly. "The council has the files. Every news outlet, every military commander in the territory has the proof. General Vance is finished." David walked over to her. He didn't say a word. He just reached out, pulled her into his chest, and buried his face in her hair. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before her arms wrapped fiercely around his waist, holding him just as tightly. The war was over, and he finally had his phantom back. Dawn broke over the capital city like a fractured mirror, casting sharp, golden light through the soaring stained glass windows of the grand war room. The room was in absolute pandemonium. The council members were shouting, holding up encrypted tablets displaying the leaked files. General Vance's military commanders were desperately trying to distance themselves, issuing orders to stand down. In the center of the chaos stood Victoria. Her immaculate facade was utterly shattered. She was screaming into her phone, demanding her guards arrest the council. But the guards were frozen, unsure of who held the power anymore. The heavy mahogany doors of the war room didn't just open. They were thrown wide with a violent crash. The shouting died instantly. A suffocating silence fell over the room. David strode in. He was covered in soot, his leather jacket torn, his face bruised and streaked with dried blood. But he walked with a terrifying, absolute authority that he had never possessed when wearing a tailored suit, and walking exactly 1/2 step behind his right shoulder, where she belonged, was Lisa. She looked equally battered, her tactical gear scarred, her eyes burning with a cold, triumphant fire. "David!" Victoria shrieked, dropping her phone. "Thank God. The council has gone mad. There's some kind of fabricated leak." "It's not fabricated," David said, his voice echoing through the massive cavern. He didn't stop walking until he was standing directly in front of her. "Your father's men are dead in the Black Ridge Mountains. Your supply lines are seized. Your generals have surrendered to my loyalists." Victoria recoiled, her face draining of color as she looked from David's hardened face to the cold, calculating stare of the woman she had dismissed as a mere security contractor. "Guards," David commanded softly, not taking his eyes off Victoria. "Detain her for high treason. She will be transferred to a federal black site pending trial." 2 of David's elite royal guards stepped forward, gripping Victoria's arms. For a moment, it looked as though she might fight, but the sheer, crushing reality of her defeat broke her. She was dragged from the room in sobbing, humiliated silence. David turned to the council. "The Northern Syndicate is dissolved. Their lands are now under direct Crown control. If any of you have a problem with the way I intend to rule this territory moving forward, speak now or pack your things." No one breathed. The Alpha had returned, and he had brought his wolf with him. "Leave us," David ordered. Within seconds, the grand room emptied, the heavy doors clicking shut. The morning sun finally crested the horizon, bathing the room in a warm, clean light. David turned to Lisa. The adrenaline of the long night was fading, leaving a profound, quiet intimacy in its wake. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. It wasn't the ostentatious, heavy crown jewel he had given Victoria. It was a sleek, understated band of black tungsten and crushed diamond. He didn't kneel. They weren't built for that kind of fairy tale. He stepped close to her, looking down into her dark, exhausted, beautiful eyes. "You told me once that you would protect the king," David murmured, his thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw. "But I don't want to protect her in the shadows anymore. I want an equal in the light. I want my queen." Lisa looked at the ring, a slow, genuine smile finally breaking through her stoic mask. It was a smile that lit up the darkest corners of his soul. "I don't wear ivory dresses, David," she warned him, her voice laced with a teasing, husky edge. "And I'm not sitting in on agricultural council meetings. You can wear tactical gear to the coronation for all I care," David replied, sliding the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. "Just don't ever disappear on me again." Lisa reached up, grabbing the collar of his ruined jacket, and pulled him down to her. The kiss was fierce, desperate, and entirely victorious. It tasted of smoke, blood, and a future they had fought through hell to secure. "I won't," she whispered against his lips. "But from now on, king or not, I'm driving." David laughed, a rich, full sound that echoed off the ancient stone walls. "Deal." David and Lisa's journey from fractured trust to an unbreakable, unified reign proves that true power doesn't come from political alliances or crowns. It comes from the fierce, undeniable loyalty of the person standing beside you in the dark. Lisa proved that sometimes you have to burn the world down to save the one you love. And David learned that a kingdom is worthless without his true equal to share it. If you loved this cinematic journey of betrayal, tactical warfare, and intense alpha romance, please leave a like, share this story with your fellow fiction lovers, and subscribe for more thrilling, dramatic tales.